Hello, and welcome to the People Grow Places podcast, where we explore the virtuous circle of people, growth, and place. Brought to you by Grow Places and hosted by our founder, Tom Larson.
Julian, hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good.
You
very
good?
well.
You good?
Very well, thanks. Yeah.
Good. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to start this conversation with a quote, and we'll go from there. So, East has a unique perspective by viewing buildings and landscapes as backgrounds to improving people's lives. Their ability to design both buildings and landscapes as components of place resonates with the needs of our cities and neighbourhoods. Designing for children to kick a ball against a wall, not simply an aesthetics of a window detail, is refreshing and valuable. Now I'm going to just step in here and let you know that's a quote that I've given for you, just for context. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on what does that resonate with you? What does that mean for you? And why do you feel like I've played that back to you?
I think it resonates a lot with me, and I must say it's very nice to hear you read it out and to have said it in the first place, because I think it's something that we've been trying for many years to achieve as architects, to hold an interest in the city so that as architects we've never been entirely interested in placing ourselves at the centre of the importance of the project. For many years we've tried to stand outside of it in order to see it from the outside, as it were, and to understand really what places are about and how architecture fits into the city. And so we have worked on public spaces and buildings together, and it's only really in the last 10 years we've managed to convince people that's an okay thing to do as architects. You should, in many people's minds, focus on buildings, and other people focus on landscape. But of course, normal people experience the two together. And we as a practice started out maybe differently from many architectural practices, where we, instead of working on a toilet extension and then a larger extension and then a house and then a small gallery, we kind of went straight to the city and to the city landscape in particular. So we walked around big areas, marshy sections of London's landscape next to the Thames, and we found that was a productive way of thinking about buildings coming from that view. And we felt quite excited about just momentarily putting the specifics of architecture aside and all the kind of fetishistic fascinations that we all have on buildings, and just sort of open it up to the bigness of the city, the kind of, not just the forms, but the things that everyone are doing. People build a cement factory, they make a port, they kind of have businesses going on, they have metal recycling. And so we began to realise we were only a small part of a bigger picture, and we could therefore locate our interests, and we could be excited anew at where we could really connect architecturally in that regard. So we would walk around, we would go to the local authority, we'd say, we think that you can do a project here because we think that things are happening here that could be improved by a fence or a piece of land swap or a small building here or an extension. And so we started big, and we've kind of ever since been focusing in on, if you like, buildings set within their context. And so I think what your quote does is makes me feel excited that it's being recognised by other people, people like yourselves who are experienced at working with a whole range of people, developers, communities, stakeholders, clients, and understand that things are complicated. Architecture is complicated, and getting places to change is complex. And in that context, you can be quite squashed and crushed under the weight of all the other needs and remits. And this is a way of getting to the heart of what's valuable in architecture, being precise. What is it that matters formally? Why is a material important? How can we do less in order to make more impact? So we have to talk a lot about it in order to position ourselves. But actually the quote feels like a brief for ourselves, and we have to keep on understanding what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what do you think is valuable then in terms of what we do? Because, as you say, it is very complicated. There's lots of different strands to everything that goes into a project, into a place. But then that idea of a child kicking a ball against a wall, there's almost something so simple in that as well. So where do you see that value then?
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? That if you talk about buildings and public space working together, you'll often have a kind of maybe a conventional, almost a jargon of urban design, where people will be looking for good places, good placemaking. They'll think about people sharing spaces, and you'll sometimes have a default mode of, well, you need active frontages, you need windows and doors on the street, and that does seem good until you start to realise that in a specific situation, where, for example, as we had in a project, there's a play street next to some housing, it can be, if you think specifically about the project, that something else needs to happen whereby you don't want the windows there, because the ball will break the window and the people inside will be annoyed and the children will feel uneasy about the proximity. So in that specific case, curiously and interestingly, it made sense to have a blank wall that you could kick a ball against with non-habitable uses behind. And then you have the first floor being the windows, not too close to the ball, good overlooking but not too in your face, the children not too overlooked, if you like. And there's a kind of specific judgment about where people can interact at certain times of day successfully using blank walls. And that seems really interesting. That what that says to us is that you do need to all the time make judgments about how public and private thresholds interface with each other. Sometimes it's a thick hedge on the ground floor, sometimes it's a slightly raised floor level on the inside of a house so that your bedroom isn't looked into but you still feel close to the ground. So it seems to me that the curve is always quite steep on these things. You have to keep learning, and each time on every project thinking again from first principles. It doesn't really help to kind of roll it out. So I think that thing of play specifically as well in the city and next to housing is a fascinating challenge, and it's always got very specific issues to deal with. So I suppose in answer to your question, what's valuable, I think it's getting those thresholds right. When you've done that, you can then make form sort of amplify and implement that kind of judgment about where things should be. I can't remember who said it. I think it was Tony Fretton. I can't remember who said that every line is a political gesture, political condition. As an architect, you draw something, it's a wall, it's an edge, it's a boundary. And I think that's true, that you're always setting down commitments to space extents. And that means that you have a kind of responsibility as an architect to judge where things can have flex or slackness or uncertainty, and other things can have a bit more determined use and certainty. And it's really interesting each time.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting analogy. And also because, life is not linear, is it? Like it's much more, unstructured, and
Totally.
And part of this, as you say, is sort of partly knowing when to draw a line, but probably also when not to draw a line as well. And when you look at your work as a holistic piece between landscape, public realm, buildings, ground floor, above, there's quite a richness that comes from that, isn't there, in terms of the way that you're looking at things?
I think so, and I think sometimes it's not so obvious where the richness is, especially when budgets are constrained. So I think it's absolutely right what you're saying. One example I can think of comes to mind is a discussion we've recently been having about lobbies in housing. The lobbies are the bits where often in housing they've taken 2 stories of height, they've become celebrated, they're tiled, they're the bits where people meet. And yet, as we have been recently hearing, because of various fire regulations, sometimes lobbies turn into nothing more than a cupboard to walk into. You have to go through another door into the corridor, which then gets you to the lifts. And what we've been recently enjoying is that you can maybe make smaller lobbies, which are more powerfully connected to the doors and the windows that you need, good materials, but not necessarily grand, just in the right place. And so I suppose we're constantly, and this is a recent thing because of fire, so I think we're constantly trying to remind ourselves what it is, where the social opportunities, where are the bits where unpredictability can happen. Is it in the lobby, or is it in the bit that leads to the lobby? The bit where you're tying a shoelace and waiting or looking at your phone to check where you are. I think those spaces are interesting to think about, because you then that's when you meet people, not when you're moving too quickly backwards and forwards, when you can feel sort of safe to hang around for a minute, just remembering what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, definitely. And so what for you personally, also for East as a business, why do you think why does it get you out of bed in the morning to promote these kind of interactions between people? What about that for you personally and as a business do you think drives your purpose?
I think architecture for me is a way of partly finding out who I am. It's very much about learning about how people meet each other and how they can learn and inform each other. So there's a kind of social interest to that that I think is. I think I tend to be quite. I'm not one of those people who build things. I don't reach for the concrete and the bricks and make things myself. I like thinking about things. So there's a lot of opportunity to think and to converse. And we've recently been re-engaging with teaching, and that again prompts the conversations that you have during the day. So I feel excited in the morning about talking about ideas in architecture, and I wouldn't say what the meaning is because that's too heavy, but just getting to a place where you can feel, that kind of thrill when you've got to a point where something feels like it's making sense. It feels like it's going to work. It feels like it's going to open up ideas. I really like architecture that doesn't close itself down, and finding the forms for that. So finding form, of course, all architects like finding form, and I like that too. I like things built and designed and done with care. But I'm also really, I think I take the challenge. There are a lot of challenges going on, but I like the challenge of not expecting the architecture to be entire and perfect and finished and complete. I like the energy that comes out of a situation that we're designing, where we have to work out how to make something that is exciting in the context of a great many compromises and difficulties. It's a little bit difficult to say it, but I think I'm genuinely excited by making something good out of a tricky situation and finding the value. And on that note, I suppose exploring the nature of unevenness is something that we've done over the years. Like, the city is uneven, and so it's a bit like the pleasure of walking through the city. I really love coming to work because I have to travel an hour to get here. It means I can cycle or walk or see things or find things, and that's what the architecture is during the day. Finding where it is that there's something that you can believe in, feels credible, feels architecturally important, and can lead to other things. That's a rambling reply.
No. It is. It's no, it's really interesting, and you talk about this idea of the journey, that you're on, probably professionally and also day to day, in terms of your journey to work and that journey of exploration and discovery. And so, you mentioned that. I'm going to just sort of ask you a little bit. You said, finding out who you are, is if you maybe take me back to, growing up, or sort of what shaped you as a person to why you do what you do now, because you've clearly got a very, passionate about the craft of what you do, but also there's this slightly bigger sort of narrative as well. And do you ever feel for where that kind of comes from in you? Or
maybe it's a kind of slightly not wanting to be pinned down too much. Like, when I was at school, I was encouraged to either do engineering or to do computing, and I didn't want to do either of those. My dad was an architect. I didn't want to do what he was doing either, to be honest. I didn't really know quite what it was. All of his friends were saying don't do architecture. They were quite cynical, and at the same time I knew enough through him of what he was doing that there would be something in architecture that I knew instinctively that I would find something within it, that it was broad enough to find, I had no idea, I liked skateboarding and music, so I didn't know what I wanted to do really, and I certainly didn't think about it very much. But what I did know was that there would be scope to do something, and maybe the word, I don't even know if I was thinking I'd like to do something creative. I don't think I even thought of that. But I did think that I wanted to not be pinned down, not go to Tesco and work in the computing section. I mean, that was impossible to imagine. So architecture, and it was really because my dad had done it, otherwise I wouldn't have thought of it, was the vehicle. And I really enjoyed it because it was conversation and people were wondering about things. There was a kind of critical dialogue that, looking back, I had no idea was important, and I almost took it for granted. But now I think, my God, it's having a critical element to any course. My son's studying international relations, my daughter's been studying English. You need critical discourse in those environments too in order to feel connected to it, because then you have a kind of, you position yourself through conversation, don't you? You ask people more and more. And so I came across people who I felt excited by, and it was really in my third year when I met Florian Bagel that I felt really like I was beginning to understand that, here was someone who was very enthused by ideas in architecture and could apply them to new projects. So it wasn't like, this is a great idea, let's do this forever. It was like, this idea can lead to another set of thinking that leads to other architectural ideas and propositions. And he had I think what I really liked was this incredible clarity in his work of spatial exactitude. So in a theatre you would have the stage, and then you'd have the roof, and in the Half Moon Theatre that he did, you had a lot of spatial clarity, which is one of my favourite buildings, because it started to be coalescing ideas about public space, social interaction, physical material consequences, something that could be simultaneously really clear architecturally, and at the same time it didn't matter if people didn't notice. I liked that too. I was really enjoying the kind of fact that architecture needs to be very precise, very careful and very thoughtful, and at the same time it doesn't matter if people don't really notice it, because life can go on. Architecture needs to be part of life rather than life part of architecture. So anyway, I suppose that was beginning to be clearer. And then I did the diploma at I went to the Polytechnic of North London, and then I stayed at North London, worked with Florian for a bit. And then I've kind of, I was enjoying that, and then I worked for a lot of practices, and I got sacked tons of times. Not entirely my own fault, I don't think. But I did eventually think, this is enough, and I should set my own practice up and sack myself if that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And then I won a European competition with a friend, got some money. I did a little, and so I kind of collaborated with some people. I collaborated with Cruiser St. John at a very early stage, briefly, and then you start to kind of get into an environment where you're having conversations with people who are really interested in similar things. So some Bates were there, got together with Mark Brearley, Dan and Judith, and so over the years we sort of got involved in a kind of conversation which is still going on today, really, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite interesting, as you were talking there, you said this feeling of not wanting to feel pinned down.
Yeah.
And actually you can kind of see that in the way that you kind of approach the profession, in the sense. Yeah, right. In the sense that you said, you know, we don't want to start with a house extension and do this. You've gone kind of,
that's funny, isn't it?
Big picture. And then now you're like, you're an architect, but we know I've worked with you in the capacity where you're a landscape architect, and your teaching, which is much broader again. So it's quite interesting, this idea of maybe even professionally not wanting to feel pinned down to one role. And I think that's quite an interesting dynamic when you project forward to kind of what the built environment needs and wants, and I do think that the roles that it's good that they're not pinned down. You're not sort of just the architect who's looking at the window details, back to that quote, or you're not just the landscape architect who's looking at the biophilia or the types of planting. There is this much more integrated approach, and even outside of the design disciplines, between a much more collaborative and collegiate project team, including the engineers, the architects, the client, the cost consultant, and trying to create a culture that is not pinned down in a sense. The culture is much freer. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
It's funny because I haven't really heard myself say that quite like that before, but you're absolutely right. I think that having the license to assert spatial ideas and conceptual ideas in the context of quite commercial clients and design teams feels like it's a bit like the pleasure of going on a bus ride through London, because it's all real, it's all there, and you've got some knowledgeable people, all with their specialist ideas, and I and my colleagues have got license to sort of consider that and say something about it, which then has spatial consequences, and it's kind of a privilege, and it's challenging as well. But it's about keeping a balance between precision and openness. And you have ideas, you believe in them, you've committed to them, and then someone says, no, you can't do it, it's too expensive. So what you have to do is to be quite robust about it and quite strategic, so that you don't fall off the bike, but you cycle around the rock. You kind of keep your head around it, and I think that keeps your mind alert. For one thing, and it keeps you wondering about ways to do good things and ways to feel that architecture is meaningful. Like architecture in this country, it's a bit of a joke for many people. It's an add-on. It's the facade. It's the icing on the cake. And of course, as we all know, it's actually intrinsic and should start in early years, really, and be brought up simply because it's so healthy and interesting and part of who we are. It's not like I don't even mean to be, evangelical about it. I just think it's practical to be involved in design because we're all clever people, and we can do a lot more with our surroundings. But it has become this kind of slightly mysterious separation from architecture and design from the math-centred conceptual sort of centre of education, let's say. And so anyway, I think that we can do more by having more conversations together, and that's why we like not to be pinned down as architects or landscape designers, but having this combined project, we're more able to have a bit of license to have ideas about places. It's harder if you've just got the building and then you've got this incredible space out to one side, which is, let's say, the river and the bank. Then your building will have to be part of that, and you need to design it together with that situation.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting take, and you've kind of touched on it there, but maybe specifically, what do you think about project structures, project cultures that could change to enable you to do your best work?
I think that champions at early stages of the project who are not the consultants help a great deal. So design, as you know, design review panels, if they're good, it can support, say, us in talking about the whole project. I think it's only in relatively recent years that if we're on a larger design team, let's say, quite often we work with bigger architectural practices, and we'll be part of the team. And we'll often look at a public realm and landscape network for the whole project. It might be, let's say, a housing scheme for 600 units. And then we might do a kind of a building or two. It's only relatively recently that we've been able to go first in a presentation to set that narrative, rather than after the main presentation in a quality review panel. And it's like, here come the landscape architects to talk about their bit where they fill stuff in, you know. That never works. So it helps a lot if people believe in a strategic urban narrative or a scene setting that sets the broad idea of what the development is about. After that, it's incredibly easy to have subsequent conversations. But if you don't do it that way around, it's very difficult to actually connect. Because people keep saying, well, why are you doing that? And why would it be like this? And why are you using brown brick? Why are you putting concrete there? You know, it's impossible for anyone to connect with it until you've introduced the project. And I think no matter how much we try and do that, I think the structure of the planning process could be bolstered even more than it is at the moment, with early supporting design review panels, but also like champions, you know, people who really believe in it. Sometimes when you've had a leader of the council who's supportive, that can work. Or it could be, you know, Richard Rogers was brilliant at kind of having clout and interest and direction. So I don't know how to make that happen a bit more, but it's about structuring clients and local authorities a bit more like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting because I feel like in that you've kind of, you're talking quite a lot about architects in the sense. It's kind of quality review panels or other architects, and part of this, I think, for me, is actually creating a much broader set of opinions and voices, whether that's just giving more weight to engineers or clients or other people even within the traditional design team, but then adding into it sociologists, anthropologists, the communities, like, you know, broader than purely just the project team as well, to try and create sort of healthier, more diverse, more vibrant kind of cultures, inputs and voices. And that's something that I think, you know, you do quite naturally in terms of your work, but I personally see that as an ability for us to get sort of richer projects, is to kind of get broader sort of viewpoints involved as well. And have you got much experience working with, you know, those sociologists, anthropologists, those types of people? Because the reason I ask that is, you know, it's industry jargon, but, you know, health and well-being, put that in inverted commas, is a really present theme in everything that we talk about within the industry now. And although, you know, the design can only go so far in terms of health and well-being, I do feel like your approach is quite in tune with people and emotions and kind of the qualitative side of place and design.
Totally agree with that, and I wish we had more experience of it. I think and this is a ridiculous kind of comment to make after what you've just set out, but quite often if you tender for a project and there's a lot of disciplines needed, the fees just simply don't reach for those other disciplines. So that's a you know, a not very helpful kind of answer to that. But we really believe in that setup, that kind of cross-section of specialists has been just always brilliant, you know. And we worked on a competition in Germany last year where we could work with archaeologists. You know, the benefit was that we weren't getting paid anything, so we didn't worry about who was there. It was just like everyone was in there. So it was kind of almost freer not to be paid for that particular moment, because it was still at the competition stage. As a team, I suppose what really needs to happen is people need not just architects but clients and everyone involved in commissioning project needs to believe that when you have those well-being components articulated in various specialisms, it will be good for everyone. It will be more sustainable. It will last longer. It'll be stronger. Be better conceived, and actually, more efficient to build. It will be more kind of reviewed. So I just wish we could have more experience of that, actually. As it is conventionally, we'll have engineers, quantity surveyor, and sometimes an artist or a kind of graphic designer, but actually getting specialists involved. I mean, I know that work with some of the larger clients like Stanhope and people like that. They're obviously much better experienced and expecting for those people to be involved, and then it feels good. I mean, we work with a whole range of clients, from quite commercial to local authorities and people in between. What we don't work on so much are cultural projects, and I think in those projects you'll tend to get a kind of interest in the wider complexion of the team quite readily, because then there's a sort of cultural consequence to that. I think it would be good for us to be able to show what benefits there are for projects which have been through that process, which have had amazing outcomes, measure them, put them back into processes where people can somehow see the data. I don't know, all of the benefits a little bit hidden, aren't they? And people, I don't know how people share it. Anyway, again, a bit of a waffly answer to saying, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, exactly.
More of them.
That would be good.
More good people.
It would be good. Julian, no, thank you very much for your time. I've just got one final question for you, which is a kind of closing tradition we have, whereby a previous guest writes down a question for you, not knowing who you are, and then after this, be kind enough to write one down for the next guest. That would be great. So the previous guest has asked, if you could choose one project of yours that you're most proud of, what would it be? And then importantly, why are you so proud of that?
There are a few. If I had to choose one right now, I think it would be, do I choose that one? One project we're very proud of is Eltham High Street, because it was a rather bad street, because it had cars everywhere, guard railing everywhere. It was a mess. It had a kind of beaten down sense of low esteem, and I think we really turned it around. We really engaged with people. We really had some amazing consultation and dialogue, and we managed to do something that was demonstrative. It wasn't apologetic. It was kind of background where it needed to be, foreground where it needed to be, and I really take pleasure when I go through the environment. I sort of feel like if I'm driving or cycling or walking through it, I think, this is amazing. Did this somehow, and I think public spaces can do that sometimes. I have the same feeling through with green lanes, where it's been dug up and beaten up. Like our first project, Borough High Street, I still love going down there because it just feels like you're in the world, and they evolve, and even as they kind of get scuffed up and rebuilt and remade, and uses evolve, it's like the idea is still there, and you can talk to people about what those ideas were and are, and you can evolve, and it's actually quite productive in terms of an ongoing conversation about public space.
Great.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Julian. Really appreciate your
a lot.
time and all the work you're doing. And as you know, I've enjoyed working together over the years, and I'm sure we can continue to do so. So,
hope so.
Thanks for that, Julian.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to the People Grow Places podcast. For more information, visit growplaces.com and follow us at We Grow Places across all social channels. See you next time.